Hey everyone, in this video I want to talk about this particular Fantastic Four show called Fantastic Four: World's Greatest Heroes. I recently rewatched it and I just want to give you my thoughts and how I experienced it, and also some details you might have missed. So to give you a little bit more context, this was a show that aired on Cartoon Network back in 2006 and was sorta meant as a tie-in for the live-action movies at the time. I remember it standing out because it had an amazingly detailed animation style. The animation was good, but maybe too good for its own good, because sadly enough, the show was cancelled after only one season, and the production cost might have something to do with it.
You have got to be kidding. No.
Let's talk about the animation style. It was done by a French animation company called Moonscoop. This was during a boom in the early 2000s where a lot of TV shows with an anime-inspired art style started to pop up. But Fantastic Four: World's Greatest Heroes went the extra mile and gave them a higher level of detail, like extra shading and having separate eyelashes during close-ups. Not only that, but it also had a really good character design. It also had really fluid animation most of the time. And the action was also pretty good. And when I was watching this show, it also reminded me of a particular show called Blood of Zeus that is currently airing. I also remember it for blending 2D and 3D visuals very well. So this show's art was definitely ahead of its time. For the most it held up pretty well, but some episodes did make it painfully obvious that this was an unintentional period piece from the early 2000s. Regarding the story, it followed the adventures of these four superheroes in mostly standalone original episodes that were done in sort of sitcom format, but occasionally there were some sequel episodes. The writing itself was nothing too deep, but I didn't mind that. It became clear to me that they were bound by the constraints of a Saturday morning cartoon show. Starting from episode 13, the show started to dive a little bit more in everyone's personality. You had Reed Richards, who could stretch himself and was also really smart. He kinda had an ego when it came to contenders of his intelligence. He also seemed to have a case of ADD. Next up you had Ben Grimm, or the Thing, who was like the brawler of this group. But most of the time he got his butt kicked, probably to showcase that teamwork was important. The only fight he ever won on his own, as far as I can remember, was against a dinosaur, which is pretty cool, not gonna lie. He also had ADD. I'm not making this up, by the way, they just outright state that in the show. And who could forget Johnny Storm, or the Human Torch, who always screwing things up and had a David Bowie haircut. And then there's Susan. She's the Invisible Woman. And she's also... how do I put this in the nicest way possible? She's kind of a baddie. So the way she was drawn was extra thick! This was Marvel Rivals before Marvel Rivals. And before anyone starts calling me out on this, the show seemed to be aware of that. If you thought Josh Whedon's Justice League was bad for doing this show came in and said, hold my beer. There were an awful lot of shots of Susan's rear, and she also did a lot of posing to highlight her curves. No matter what the situation was, Susan always found a way to arch her back.
You know part of you is enjoying this.
Maybe.
Not that I'm complaining, of course. So after all of this, I saw it as my duty to make a compilation out of it. So without any further ado, I say, release the cake cut.
Well, that's good.
I hate to say it, but that was hot.
I'm just gonna state that up front, she was my cartoon crush growing up, but you probably already guessed that from the thumbnail. It's probably safe to say that most people who watch this show remember it because of her. Which brings me to my following point. This show is kinda horny, and the animators knew what they were doing. If you don't believe me, don't take my word for it. So in this scene we have a character called Alicia, and she's some sort of confidant slash friend of Ben Grimm. And in this scene, Just look at her green top. You got that? Now notice this next scene. Yeah, you see that? That's at least a full 72 frames that someone spent drawing. Also the fact that Doom built himself a Fenbob just because he could. And there's also She-Hulk, of course. That being said, Susan Storm really was the team mom. While Ben and Johnny had their squabbles and Reed Richards was easily distracted, Susan was the only one who had to keep it together. And when the chips were down, she stood on business. And in a lot of the earlier episodes, she was the most competent fighter simply because her powers were so versatile.
I can't stretch.
Well, aren't you three just the sorriest excuses for superheroes?
Susan? How?
The show also brought in a lot of other Marvel characters like Namor, for example, who in this version had really arch eyebrows, like Vampira or something. And then there was an Iron Man who also concealed his identity and preferred to work alone.
You misunderstand me. Your assistance is no longer required. I'll take care of this Doom character. He stole Tony Stark's property. He's Iron Man's problem.
One episode also had a photographer who was meant to be Peter Parker, but they simply couldn't call him that because of a contract with Sony at the time. Something else I also really liked about the series was the chemistry between the members of the Fantastic Four. They really felt like a family that cared for each other. However, sometimes they were just straight up assholes to each other.
Riot!
What?
I was about to get frozen and you went to change your clothes?
Well, you're fine, aren't you? Anyway, those were my good pajamas.
The humor also worked really well. It was actually quite funny. It was like this blend between visual humor and dad jokes. Corny, yes, but never cringy. And Johnny has like the funniest scream ever. Among my favorite episodes were Imperious Rex, which was focused on Susan as a negotiator. I liked it because it highlighted her diplomatic skills, and on top of that it also showed how powerful she could be when she faced off against Namor, who in this series was a pinnacle of physical strength. And another one was Contest of Champions, which has the Fantastic Four participate in an intergalactic game show, which had them land in all sorts of comedic situations. So, in the end, it's definitely a show worth checking out or revisiting because it held up very well, and I hope it can find a new audience. And that's all I have to say today.